Hello everyone, and welcome to my Bold and Beautiful Gossips 24 channel. I hope everyone is having a wonderful day. Before we begin, please hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. The Forrester manse had always stood as a symbol of heritage, power and tradition, its towering walls holding decades of recollections, triumphs, dolor and backstabbings. From glamorous fashion triumphs to bitter family feuds, every corner of the estate carried emotional weight. Yet, in recent weeks, an unsettling pressure had begun to settle over the grand property, a quiet storm brewing beneath the polished marble bottoms and elegant chandeliers. Commodity had shifted within the Forrester family, and indeed those closest to the manse could smell that change was coming. Brooke and Ridge, long habituated to the drama that followed their family, felt a strange apprehension creeping into their lives, one that had nothing to do with love or business battles. This time the trouble came from within, and it centered on Eric Forrester himself. Eric, the deified primogenitor of the Forrester dynasty, had always been seen as the emotional anchor of the family. His wisdom, charm, and passion for both fashion and family had guided the Forrester name through innumerous storms. Indeed, in his after times, he remained fiercely defensive of the manse and the traditions it represented. The estate was further than a home. It was a monument to his life's work, a physical memorial of everything he'd erected alongside his cherished late woman, Stephanie. To imagine Eric doing anything that could peril that heritage felt unbelievable to Brooke and Ridge. And yet, subtle changes in his jest had begun to raise red flags. Katie Logan, Eric's former mate and the mama of his son, Will, had still re-entered his world in a way that sounded innocent on the face. Their renewed connection was framed as collective support, two familiar souls chancing comfort in participated history. Still, beneath the face, their bond had taken on a further strategic and uncommunicative tone. Eric had begun meeting with Katie in private, agitating matters that went far beyond emotional fellowship. What No Bone realized was that these exchanges involved the very future of the Forrester manse itself. Behind unrestricted doors, Eric had been scuffling with a growing sense of vulnerability. Age, health enterprises, and the fear of losing control over his conglomerate counted heavily on him. He'd watched his children and grandchildren battle over power, love, and influence, frequently forgetting the values that formerly held the family together. The manse, once a sanctuary, had come a battlefield for contending intentions. Eric bothered that the property could ultimately fall into the wrong hands, or come contributory damage in the family's endless conflicts. In his mind, he wasn't betraying the family. He was guarding them in the only way he knew how. Katie, ever perceptive and emotionally intelligent, had noticed Eric's enterprises long before anyone differently. She understood his fears of getting inapplicable, of losing his voice in a family he'd erected from nothing. Their exchanges sluggishly evolved from particular reflections into serious conversations about estate planning and legal protections. Katie, with her business expertise and calm address, offered results that Eric set up reassuring. But those results came with consequences that neither Brooke nor Ridge could have imagined. Unknown to the rest of the family, Eric had inked a non-public agreement that granted Katie partial control over crucial fiscal and legal aspects of the Forrester estate. The deal was designed to ensure that certain means, including the manse, would be defended under a separate trust. In Eric's mind, this move would help reckless opinions from tearing the family piecemeal. Still, the counter-accusations of the agreement were far more explosive than he realized. By involving Katie without consulting Brooke or Ridge, Eric had effectively shifted the balance of power within the family. Brooke, who had always considered the Forrester manse her emotional home, began to smell that Commodity was wrong. Subtle changes in Eric's routines, unexplained meetings, and rumored phone calls created an atmosphere of secretiveness that didn't sit well with her. She had lived through enough backstabbings to fate the warning signs. The manse wasn't just a place to live. It represented her complicated history with Ridge, her connection to the Forrester heritage, and her sense of belonging. The idea that opinions about the estate were being made without her knowledge felt like a particular poke. Ridge too felt the shift. As the creative force behind Forrester Creations and Eric's son, he'd always assumed he'd play a central part in any major family opinions. Yet, Eric had grown distant, diverting questions and avoiding conversations about the future of the estate. Ridge's frustration coddled beneath the face, fueled by the fear that his father no longer trusted him. The sense of being sidelined cut deeper than any business contest ever had. The verity eventually began to unravel when a routine legal inquiry uncovered irregularities in the Manses' power structure. Documents revealed that Katie now held significant influence over the estate's fiscal operation. Brooke was blindsided. The disclosure felt like a treason not just from Eric, but from Katie as well. She plotted to understand why Eric would make such a monumental decision without consulting the family. The sense of rejection restarted old injuries, reminding Brooke of every time she had felt like a stranger in the Forrester world. Ridge's response was indeed more violent. The Manse was part of his identity, a symbol of his father's heritage and his own place in the family scale. Learning that control had been still shifted to Katie felt like a direct challenge to his part. He questioned Eric's judgment, wondering whether age and fear had clouded his father's formerly sharp instincts. The emotional fallout was immediate, creating a rift that hovered to fracture the family at its core. Eric, caught between his intentions and the consequences, set up himself in strange home. He'd no way meant to hurt Brooke or Ridge. His thing had been to guard the family's future, not to enkindle a new surge of conflict. Yet, the secretiveness girding the deal had only fueled dubitation and resentment. The more he tried to justify his conduct, the more distant his favored bones came. Katie, meanwhile, set up herself at the center of a storm she hadn't completely anticipated. While she had agreed to the arrangement out of concern for Eric's well-being, she hadn't anticipated the counterreaction to be so severe. Brooke's disappointment was palpable, and Ridge's wrathfulness was insolvable to ignore. Katie had always walked a delicate line within the Forrester family, balancing her fidelity to her own values with her complicated history with both Brooke and Ridge. Now, she stood indicted of overpassing boundaries that had no way been easily defined. As pressures escalated, the Manse itself sounded to reflect the emotional fermentation within its walls. Formerly warm and inviting, the atmosphere grew cold and heavy. Family gatherings came simulated, filled with implied allegations and moping resentment. Every hallway echoed with the weight of undetermined conflict, and the majesty of the estate felt more like a memorial of what was at stake than a source of comfort. Brooke plotted with passions of treason and instability. She had always fought for her place in the Forrester family, enduring innumerous obstacles to maintain her connection to Ridge and the heritage they participated. The study that Eric could make such a life-altering decision without her input made her question her standing formerly again. Her sense of belonging felt fragile, hovered by secrets she no way saw coming. Ridge, on the other hand, viewed the situation as a challenge to his authority and his part as Eric's successor. The Forrester Manse wasn't just a family home. It was a foundation of the brand's image and history. Allowing someone differently, indeed Katie, to have control over it felt like a treason of everything Eric had tutored him. The frustration coddled beneath Ridge's face confidence, hanging to erupt at any moment. Eric set up himself torn between defending his choices and admitting the pain he'd caused. He'd always believed that experience and wisdom granted him the right to make delicate opinions for the family. But now he was forced to defy the reality that trust, formerly broken, wasn't fluently repaired. His intentions might have been noble, but the prosecution had created a wedge that hovered to divide the family beyond form. Katie's position grew decreasingly complicated. She had no way sought power or control over the Forrester heritage, yet she now set up herself in a part that carried immense responsibility and scrutiny. Her conduct, though motivated by concern for Eric, had inadvertently deposited her as an implicit trouble to the family's consanity. The emotional strain of navigating Brooke's hurt and Ridge's wrathfulness counted heavily on her, forcing her to question whether she had made the right choice. As rumors spread and pressures boosted, the future of the Forrester Manse came uncertain. What had formerly been a symbol of stability now represented conflict and division. The estate's fate hung in the balance, caught between Eric's defensive instincts and the family's desire for translucency and trust. The deeper issue still wasn't just about property or legal agreements. It was about trust, communication, and the fear of losing control. Eric's secret deal with Katie had exposed long-standing precariousness within the family, forcing everyone to defy uncomfortable trueness about their connections and precedences. Brooke began to reflect on her own trip within the Forrester world, realizing how frequently she had been left in the dark about opinions that affected her life. The situation with Eric and Katie felt like history repeating itself, a memorial that translucency had always been a struggle within the family. Ridge, too, faced a moment of tone reflection. His wrathfulness stemmed not just from the deal itself, but from the fear that he was no longer his father's trusted confidant. The consummation that Eric had turned to Katie rather of him forced Ridge to question his own part in the family dynamic. Eric, caught between generations, plotted to bridge the emotional gap he'd created. His desire to cover the heritage had led him to make choices that insulated the very people he wanted to guard. The irony wasn't lost on him, yet undoing the damage proved far more complicated than he'd anticipated. Katie, standing at the center of it all, faced the challenge of navigating her newfound influence while maintaining her integrity. She understood that trust had to be earned, especially in a family as complex as the Forresters. Her precedence remained Eric's well-being, but she couldn't ignore the emotional fallout of her involvement. As the weeks passed, the manse remained a silent substantiation to the family's struggle. Every room held recollections of love, loss, and adaptability, reminding them of what they stood to lose if the conflict continued. The Forrester heritage had survived innumerous storms, but this one hovered to strike at its very foundation. The question that dallied in the air was whether the family could overcome the treason and rebuild the trust that had been shattered. Eric's secret deal with Katie had exposed cracks in the foundation of their connections, but it also offered an occasion for growth and understanding, if they were willing to face the verity together. For Brooke and Ridge, the road ahead would bear delicate exchanges and emotional vulnerability. For Eric, it meant admitting that indeed the stylish intentions could lead to unintended consequences. And for Katie, it meant proving that her involvement came from a place of fidelity, not ambition. The future of the Forrester manse remained uncertain, its fate intertwined with the family's capability to heal. What had formerly been a symbol of consanity now stood as a memorial of how fragile that consanity could be. Whether the estate would continue to represent the strength of the Forrester heritage, or come a casualty of undetermined conflict, depended on the choices they made coming. In the end, the manse was further than just bricks and mortar. It was a reflection of the family itself, beautiful, complex, and vulnerable. Eric's secret deal had shaken its foundation, but it also revealed the emotional bonds that still held the Forresters together. The challenge now was to rebuild those bonds before the damage came unrecoverable. The fallout from Eric's secret agreement with Katie didn't fade still into the background. Rather, it spread through the Forrester family like a slow-burning fire, touching every relationship and exposing long-standing pressures that had been buried beneath times of tradition and fidelity. The manse, once a place of festivity and family consanity, came a silent substantiation to simulated relations and uneasy silences. Each passing day brought new layers of emotional complexity, as Brooke and Ridge plotted to reuse what Eric's conduct truly meant for their future. Brooke set up herself walking through the familiar halls of the manse with a heavy heart. Every portrayal on the walls, every precisely chosen piece of decor, reminded her of the life she had erected within these walls. The estate represented her palms and her dolor, her love story with Ridge, and her unvarying commitment to the Forrester family. Now, the sense of security she formerly felt had been replaced by query. The consummation that Eric had trusted Katie with commodities so monumental made Brooke question where she truly stood in the family scale. Her studies frequently drifted to the history, recalling moments when she had fought for her place in Ridge's life and the Forrester heritage. She had endured battles, backstabbings, and numerous emotional storms, always believing that her connection to the family was imperturbable. Yet, this rearmost development made her feel like a stranger formerly again, as though the foundation she had reckoned on was beginning to crack. Ridge, on the other hand, approached the situation with a blend of frustration and wounded pride. As Eric's son and the creative force behind Forrester Creations, he'd always assumed he'd be the first to know about any major opinions involving the estate. Learning about the deal after it was formally done made him feel sidelined, as though his father no longer viewed him as a trusted mate. This sense of rejection stirred up old precariousness about his part within the family and his capability to live up to Eric's heritage. The emotional distance between Eric and Ridge grew more conspicuous with each passing day. While Eric maintained his composed surface, those closest to him could smell the weight of remorse pressing down on him. He'd no way intended to hurt his son or Brooke, but the secretiveness girding the deal had created a hedge he plotted to strike. His desire to cover the family's future had ironically left him insulated from the very people he wanted to guard. Katie, meanwhile, set up herself navigating an decreasingly uncomfortable position. She had agreed to support Eric out of genuine concern for his well-being and the preservation of the Forrester heritage. Still, she hadn't anticipated the emotional counterreaction that would follow. Brooke's disappointment felt deeply particular, and Ridge's stewing wrathfulness was insolvable to ignore. Katie had always tried to maintain balance within the family, but now she stood at the center of a conflict that hovered to review her place in their lives. As pressures coddled, whispers began to circulate about the implicit long-term consequences of Eric's decision. The legal structure girding the manse and its means raised questions about control, heritage, and the future of the Forrester name. While Eric believed he'd taken a necessary step to cover the estate, others stressed that the arrangement could lead to power struggles that would tear the family piecemeal. The manse itself sounded to image the emotional climate of its residers. Once filled with horselaugh and festivity, the atmosphere now felt restrained, nearly fragile. Family gatherings came more formal, with polite grins masking deeper frustrations. Exchanges that formerly flowed painlessly were now laced with implied pressure, as everyone mooched around the subject that impended over them. Brooke set up solace in quiet moments of reflection, trying to make sense of the shifting dynamics. She questioned whether her history with Eric and Katie had told their decision to count her from such an important matter. The sense of being overlooked reignited old fears of not truly belonging, despite all she had invested in the Forrester family. Ridge, too, scuffled with clashing feelings. His fidelity to his father disaccorded with his need for translucency and respect. He understood Eric's desire to cover the estate, yet he couldn't ignore the sting of being left out of the process. The manse wasn't just property. It was a symbol of everything his family stood for. The study that its future could be shaped without his input felt like a treason of their participated history. Eric's internal struggle strengthened as he observed the impact of his choices. He'd spent his life erecting the Forrester heritage, icing that his family's name would endure. But now, the very way he took to save that heritage were creating division. The consummation counted heavily on him, forcing him to defy the possibility that his approach, however well-intentioned, had been bloodied. Katie's part continued to evolve in unanticipated ways. She set up herself acting as both a support system for Eric and a ground between him and the rest of the family. Her presence, formerly comforting, now carried an added subcast of responsibility. She wanted to assure Brooke and Ridge that her involvement was embedded in fidelity, not ambition, but the emotional injuries were still too fresh for easy consolation. As the days passed, the future of the Forrester manse remained a content of quiet enterprise. Some stressed that the estate could come a log-rolling chip in future conflicts, while others bothered that undetermined pressures would erode the family's continuity. The manse, once a symbol of stability, now represented the fragile balance between tradition and change. Brooke began to reflect on her own part within the family, questioning how important influence she truly had over opinions that shaped her life. She had always believed in open communication and emotional honesty, yet this situation revealed how fluently secrets could disrupt indeed the strongest bonds. Her desire for clarity grew stronger, driven by the need to cover not just the manse, but the connections that defined her life. Ridge's perspective shifted as he considered the broader counter-accusations of the situation. Beyond the particular treason, he honored the implicit impact on Forrester creations and the family's public image. The manse was intertwined with the brand's identity, and any query girding its power could ripple through the company. The stakes were advanced than he'd originally realized. Eric's sense of responsibility remained unvarying, indeed as mistrustfulness crept by. He believed that leadership needed delicate choices, but he also understood that trust was the foundation of any lasting heritage. The challenge now was chancing a way to rebuild that trust without unraveling the protections he'd put in place. Katie's emotional adaptability was tested as she navigated the complex dynamics around her. She had always valued harmony, yet now she set up herself in a part that needed firmness and clarity. Balancing Eric's wishes with the family's enterprises came a delicate task, one that demanded tolerance and understanding. The The manse stood as a constant memorial of what was at stake. Its grand armature and rich history represented decades of perseverance, creativity, and love. Yet, beneath its elegant face, the cracks in the family's continuity were getting harder to ignore. Brooke's determination to cover her sense of belonging fueled her resoluteness to seek answers. She wanted to understand Eric's logic, not just for her own peace of mind, but for the sake of the family's future. Her emotional investment in the manse went beyond property. It was tied to her identity and her vision of what the Forrester heritage should represent. Ridge's frustration gradationally converted into a desire for formative change. While wrathfulness had originally driven his response, reflection led him to consider the significance of communication and collective respect. He knew that rebuilding trust would bear tolerance, but he was willing to face the challenge if it meant conserving the family's continuity. Eric's trip came one of tone reflection and modesty. He began to fate that indeed the strongest leaders must acclimatize, especially when their opinions affect those they love. The consummation that his secretiveness had caused pain counted heavily on him, pushing him to consider new ways of connecting with his family. Katie's perspective remained predicated in empathy. She understood that mending would take time and that her conduct, however well-meaning, had reshaped her connections with Brooke and Ridge. Her focus shifted toward fostering understanding and stability, hoping to ease the emotional strain that had settled over the family. As weeks turned into months, the emotional geography of the Forrester family continued to evolve. The original shock gave way to deeper exchanges about trust, heritage, and the future. While the manse's legal status remained unchanged, the emotional significance of the situation grew more profound. Brooke set up strength in admitting her vulnerability. She realized that expressing her passions, indeed when uncomfortable, was essential for mending. The situation with Eric and Katie forced her to defy long-standing precariousness, but it also reminded her of her adaptability. Ridge embraced the occasion for growth, fating that leadership within the family needed further than authority. It demanded empathy, translucency, and an amenability to hear. His commitment to the Forrester heritage remained strong, but his approach came more thoughtful and inclusive. Eric's vision for the future began to shift as he sought to balance protection with openness. He wanted the manse to remain a symbol of continuity, not division. The challenge lay in aligning his intentions with the requirements and prospects of his family. Katie's part as a middleman came more defined. Her capability to hear and empathize deposited her as a ground between generations, helping to navigate the emotional complications that girdled the manse's future. The Forrester manse, standing altitudinous against the background of Los Angeles, continued to represent both the beauty and fragility of family heritage. Its walls held stories of triumph and heartache, reminding the Forresters that their strength lay not just in their success, but in their capability to face challenges together. The true impact of Eric's secret deal wasn't measured in legal terms, but in emotional bones. It forced the family to defy their fears, reassess their precedences, and review what the Forrester heritage truly meant. While the path forward remained uncertain, the occasion for growth and understanding offered a hint of stopgap. In the end, the manse's fate would be shaped not just by contracts and agreements, but by the choices the family made in their connections. Trust, formerly shaken, could be rebuilt with honesty and trouble. The Forrester heritage, embedded in creativity and passion, still had the implicit to thrive if the family chose continuity over division. The story of the Forrester manse was far from over. It remained a living symbol of adaptability, reflecting the complications of love, fidelity, and heritage. And as the family continued to navigate the fate of Eric's decision, one verity came clear: the strength of the Forresters lay not in their wealth or power, but in their amenability to face challenges together and crop stronger than ahead.